Pastor Larry Enriquez, and this is 2020 Church, and I'm glad that you're here with us. And as we prepare our hearts to hear what God has to say in His Word and through His Word, I hope that you can meditate and listen to this song with me. And if you know it, sing along. Sometimes we don't know much about life till we look back. And looking back, we find how patient God has been with us. Certainly how patient He's been with me. Lord, I hear you knocking my door. How long have you been waiting? Seems I've never really heard you before. I've kind of let the place go, yeah. I'm ashamed of what you'll find, but you can make yourself at home if you're sure that you don't mind. 'Cause when I cry, the roof leaks. When the wind blows, the walls are weak, and the house is known by the company it keeps. Oh, and I feel better now that you're near, and I want to make it clear. Jesus, from now on, you're always welcome here. There are dark rooms deep inside me I never thought you'd find. And I've tried to hide inside them, 'cause I guess you've always known that one day you'd call me, yeah. Not awakened from my sleep, and you'd take me just the way I am, and you'd promise me you'd keep me. 'Cause when I cry, the roof leaks, and when the wind blows, the walls are weak, and the house is known by the company it keeps. Oh, and I feel better now that you're near, and I want to make it clear. Jesus, from now on, you're always welcome here. Jesus, from now on, you're always welcome here. We want to be like Jesus. When we become Christians, we become followers of Jesus, and we want to be like Christ. And then when we read the Bible, we understand with clarity that God the Father wants to make us more like His Son. Realizing that, of course, we'll never be Him. That's not the point, but that we be like Him. We're made uniquely who we are to be like Christ. But sometimes I don't know that we really understand what that means and the work that takes. That is the work of God's Spirit in us and our need to trust and obey and have faith and to live intentional lives for Christ. Last week, I taught on the fullness of joy, and the week before that on the reality of peace, real peace in your life, and that peace and joy are part of being like Jesus. And this week I want to talk a little bit about patience, because patience is being like Jesus. A couple mornings ago, I it was the afternoon really, and I'd went into our kitchen, and my 6 grandkids were there with their moms, and uh, and in the background we have a speaker that's playing through it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, and this little light of mine is playing. But as that's playing in the background, I hear this: "Stop it, honey! Don't choke! Quit! Don't bite! Don't choke! Quit hitting!" And it's like there's like chaos is erupting, and the kids are fighting each other and biting each other and choking each other. And I walked out of my room because I could hear it. It was getting loud. And as I opened my door and came out into the kitchen and heard this little light of mine playing and all of that going on in the foreground, it was funny. I laughed. I guess you could look at that, hear that, and cry. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like laughing. And it just reminded me of the reality of life, that we want to be like Jesus, but it takes work to be like Jesus. And it takes work to teach our children to be like Jesus too. You know, there's a passage in James 1:19. It says this: "Therefore, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear." That is man and woman, capital M. "Therefore, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God, or it doesn't accomplish the righteousness of God." It's another way of saying be patient. In fact, if we were to read, again, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, that would be the definition of patience pretty much. We become impatient. We can't be this when we believe or expect life to be different than it is. When we think, oh, you should have every answer that is to be given to the proposed question at any given time. When we think that everybody should be happy and joyful when we feel happy and joyful, when we think that all things should be in order when we're in order, all of those kinds of things. It's kind of like we become impatient when we believe or expect that life isn't the way it's supposed to be. That life is to be different at any given time. We become impatient. When we read this passage in in James 1:19 about being swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, when it tells us that really when we're not slow to these things, that we're not like Jesus, we have to read that in context. Like a lot of things in the Bible, we tend to take them out of context. Last night we had our Taco Tuesday, and we had a little devotion before we prayed and ate together. And I had mentioned that passage in Philippians 4:13 that says, "I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me." And we find that's an empowering verse that we hold on to. I can do all things through Christ. You can be whatever you want, son. You can be whatever you want, honey, because you can do all things through Christ. But when we read in context that passage, it's in light of a very difficult time in the life of Paul and the life of the church. It's about suffering and struggle. It's about having a lot and not having much at all and learning to be content. And it's about living life joyfully when the circumstances aren't joyful. When he says, I can do all things. What things? These things. I can work through the difficulties of life because of Christ in me. That's the context of that passage. And so the context of be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger is this context. I'm going to read to you now from James chapter 1. I'm going to start in verse 2 and just go through this quickly, but just to give a sense of this idea of patience and where it comes from, and how we need to strive to be patient, because it's being like Jesus. In fact, we're told to be patient. In fact, we're told it's a fruit of the Spirit. It's a work that the Spirit of God does inside of you as we cooperate with Him and understand and know and hold the truth of life. Here's what it says. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, because you're going to, right? That's why it's saying this. Count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. And by the way, I want to say up front that we think of temptations often and related to the luring sin of our leisure. In other words, in the West, we're tempted to soothe ourselves through sinful things, drugs, and too much alcohol, and sex, and the things that we really walk hand in hand with when we're so full of leisure and the idea that we deserve to feel good. But he's talking about the temptation, I think, of not hanging in there when things are tough. Now, as things get tough for us, and they will, you need to learn to hang in there. Because we learn to hang in there in the small things, we can hang in there in the big things. So when he says, my brothers, count it all joy when you encounter various temptations or diverse temptations, it's the temptation to quit, the temptation to find solace apart from God. He goes on to say, knowing that the trying of your faith develops patience, that the very temptations that come, the very heartaches and difficulties that come, will develop and are there to help you develop patience. It says, let patience perfect its work. In other words, the need to wait, the need to suffer long, the need to not quit, the need to not give up, to be patient will create something in us that will really make us more like Jesus. It'll make us more like the Lord. And we say we want to be like Him. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and without criticism, and it will be given to him. Let him ask in faith, without wavering. For he who wavers is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed with the wind. Let not that man think that he will receive anything from the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So it takes a stability of trust, a stability of faith to receive the wisdom that we ask of God. Hang in there. Life will not be all nice and cozy and full of leisure. Life will have its difficulties, its temptations. Know that and be patient. When you think life should be different, that it shouldn't have problems or trouble, you won't be patient. When you go to the store, when you go out to dinner, even nowadays when we go to dinner, we find that it's tough on the servers because they have less of them and they're having to do more tables, and there's a little bit more money we're paying for the food, and it's not any better. In fact, the service is a little bit worse, and we're asked to pay more, and so they're a little bit on edge because people are on edge, and if you don't go knowing that it's like that and you think it should be different, you're going to become impatient. And you'll be quick to anger, not slow to anger. You'll be quick to speech, not slow to speech. You'll not listen well. You'll be quick to respond. But know that God is using these circumstances in our lives to build something greater in us that's like Jesus. That's why it's called the fruit of the Spirit. Well, we'll get to that. It goes on to say this in verse 12: Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he is tried, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. If God cannot be tempted, because God cannot be tempted with evil, neither does he tempt anyone. But each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. Then, when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin, and when sin is finished, it brings forth death. You see, all sin brings forth a very negative thing that the Bible calls death in our lives. So don't err by jumping out of your need to hang in there. You know, God has made it possible for us to come boldly to the throne of grace when we slip up, when we're not patient, when we get angry and we really shouldn't be getting angry, when we defend ourselves at the expense of others, and we yell at them and we call them names and we hold grudges, and it's like, that's just terrible, a terrible way for us to be, but we can be that way. So I'm going to ask you to be patient because Jesus is patient. The word patience comes from the Greek word macrothemia. It really means long suffering. That's sometimes the way it's translated. It means to wait a sufficient amount of time before you express any anger. It avoids the premature use of force. This word means that. To hold back force, to hold back your dislike, your need to self-protect. It says hold that back. That's what patience means. You know, this word patience is used of God in the scriptures, that he's patient with you. Like the song we just sang, it's like, you know, we're in relationship to a God who is so patient with us that he's often been knocking and speaking to us, and we've not even paid attention. True patience or long suffering is a fruit that God wants to bear in your life to make you like Jesus. In Galatians 5:22 it says, but when the Holy Spirit controls our lives, he will produce this kind of fruit in us: love, joy, peace, and here's that word, patience. See, we talk about love and joy and peace, but we often skip around patience. It's a hard one. But if we can know in our hearts and in our heads that God is working something in us as we delay our dislike for the way things might be, and learn to be kind and gentle in return, that there's great fruit in that, and you'll be more like Jesus. You know, if anybody was going to be impatient, antsy, on edge, or discouraged, it would have been Noah. He lived in a crooked, wacky time of history. When you read on Noah, you go, oh my gosh, how wacky is that? It was so bad that you know, we find words where God is saying, gosh, humanity is so bad, I'm sorry I created them. It's an expression of his sadness to sin's effect on humanity. So much so that he calls on Noah to build an ark because he's going to rid the earth of all the evil that is everywhere in creation, humans and the earth. Well, Noah takes about 120 years, 120 years to build the ark. And during the time of building that ark, I don't think he had much encouragement or much attaboys. He just didn't. It was Noah. he was doing it. He was trusting and believing in God, and he was doing it really for his family. And it didn't even say that his family's encouraging him. I just think he's a lone guy. And his family gets saved in this unique way because of Noah and through Noah. But think about that. If it took 120 years times 365, wow, you've got like 43, 1,800 days of doing a work, a project by which there's really no support. Talk about patience. We can read about Noah in Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Fame of Faith. He had patience. He really believed and trusted God. And when he heard God's warning about what was coming, Noah believed God, even though there was no sign of a flood or any clouds or any sense of what even rain was. I'm sure that there were many days where Noah felt frustrated. Now, I don't know how frustrated he was, but if I just put myself in this position, I mean, if we don't get an attaboy or good job in a day, in a week, in a month, I mean, we're cranky. Noah worked on this project for close to 44,000 days on his own. And he didn't give up. Okay, we're not Noah, but we're made of the same substance that Noah is, and we certainly have the same God who we can trust and believe like he did. So I want to encourage you to trust and believe in this God who will take us in and through suffering to make us more like Jesus. The end result isn't what you want usually. It just isn't. Tough things are tough and have tough results at times, difficult results at times. But the end all isn't me wanting life to end up the way I want it to end up. The end all for me is Christ. May it be that for you, so that when things are all done, we can say, I now rejoice in my sufferings for you, as Paul speaks to the Colossian congregation, and fill up in my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ, for the sake of his body, which is the church, that he rejoices in his suffering because he knows that there's good for those whom he serves, the body of Christ. We find joy in the fact that when difficult things come and difficult things happen, when sufferings come of all kinds, that we can be patient knowing that God is building something greater than we can ever imagine. Believe and trust in Jesus. Remember, we become impatient when we believe or expect life is to be different than it is. Realize that God is with you in and through it all to make you more like Jesus. Enjoy the journey. This isn't a message to say, woe is me, but that life is hard and difficult and that God is doing something great in the midst of it. And you have that joy and a power to be patient. Well, I love you, and I pray that God would, in fact, continue to grow in you the fruits of his Spirit. Go in peace. I hope to see you this Sunday.